Welcome all you would-be's to our 10th lesson in sharpening. This might be the most important lesson of them all, because if your hand tools are not sharp, it's not just harder to do the job, it's impossible. There's some situations where without a sharp tool it just will not work, period. Don't care how much you try. So your tools have to be sharp, and they have to be razor sharp. When we first learned to sharpen tools at Rochester, when the students first learned, they would test the sharpness on the back of their hand. Like if I wanted to sharpen this chisel to razor sharp, the way I could tell it was razor sharp is see if it shaved the hairs off. And if it would shave the hairs, then it was razor sharp. Well, as a big joke at school, you could always tell the wood majors because they didn't have any hair in the back of their arms. But we got a craftsman in who spoke to us from Europe. And a student asked him how he tested the sharpness of his chisels. And he said on his fingernail. So from then on, there were no more shaving your arms. You test it on the back of your fingernail. It should just barely pick up a small piece. Now this is I'm going to show you the way to sharpen this chisel as sharp as a razor. So if you follow my instructions, you will succeed. And when you do succeed, you're going to have a sharp chisel. It's going to be razor sharp. And if you're not careful, you're going to cut yourself with it. When I was an early woodworker back in the late 60s, I hitchhiked around the country with my hand tools in a knapsack on my back. I'd go to different friends' house and they'd put me up for a week or two, and to pay for that, I would sharpen all their knives. So I would take out my sharpening equipment and I would sharpen their knives for them. And every time I did it, they cut themselves. So I had to quit doing it. So just be careful because it's going to work. So just go to your supplier who you bought your chisels from and get a stone. You probably bought it at the same time. One side is rough, one side is smooth, and you usually start off with an angle on the chisel. If you're worrying about exactly what angle to grind that chisel, do 30 degrees. So 30 degrees actually means that this distance right there that's ground off, if you measure that distance, it's exactly twice as wide as the chisel is thick. That's just I think the sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. So anyway, it's twice the thickness that bevel is. So you try that. You can make it a little sharper than that, a little blunter than that, depending on the wood you're working on. But anytime you need an angle, just 30 degrees. So you either grind that on a belt sander, or grind it on a wheel, or grind it on the stone, but make it 30 degrees. You take the smooth side of your stone, which is already ground, and just barely tip it up enough so that you're almost flat on the bevel, but just a little bit more, so you're only working on the very edge, and pull it back, and you got to keep that angle. This angle right here to the stone has to be the same. You can push or pull, but most craftsmen just pull the stone, pull the chisel across like that. And after you do that for about 10 times, you'll find that you can run your finger over the back edge, and there's a little burr. They call it a wire burr that was pulled up because of steel's elasticity. It'll just pull that burr right up there. So you got to get rid of that burr. So you just turn it over, and you ask them to remain flat. No angle on this. It's flat as can be. I'm touching all of the stone across the whole stone. You usually like to work the whole stone at one time, or else you wear a little pocket in the stone. And then you have to flatten the stone again. You have to take it out and flatten it. I used to take it out in front of my old shop and rub it on the sidewalk till it was flat. You can do that. The proper method is to buy 2 stones and rub them both together occasionally to keep them both flat. Now I've got the burr off the back, but see what has happened is now on the bevel side, there's that slight burr again. It's just flipped to the other side. So now you do it again on the bevel side. Maintaining that angle. Keep that angle well maintained and keep plenty of pressure on the middle of the blade when you're pulling it through. Don't do this. Don't do that. That in effect dulls the blade. You got to keep that angle the same all the way through. Now there's a burr on that side. The burr is a lot smaller now. Rub that burr off. And well, it's not off. This is an oil stone. You can get water stones. Now, that's pretty sharp. Very little burr on that, very little burr on that. So when I take that burr off that bevel side this time, I've changed the direction of, and I'm pulling it this way. So I'm just touching that, the razor edge, just the tip of the bevel, coming straight across like that. Now it should have a little burr. I'll take that burr off. Now, we've all seen that a barber takes his razors and sharpens them on a long leather strop. Strops them on that leather strop. So cabinet makers don't have that kind of a strop. They glue leather. I glued a piece of 1/4 inch thick cowhide to a board, and I charged that with a very fine abrasive chromium oxide. It's green, and you just, that much has lasted me 10 years. So I probably won't use that up in my lifetime. So you just rub that on there, and it helps cut into the steel a lot better than just leather. Now you take this, and you just take this strop, run it that way, turn it over, run it that way, turn it over. I'm getting the pressure right on the, not on the whole bevel, just on that edge. And then turn it that way and strop it that way. Now, that should be sharp as a razor. So you touch it with your fingernail. If it pulls just a little bit of fingernail up, you know it's good and sharp. So you can extrapolate that into any hand tool that you want to sharpen. Now that you have your chisel razor sharp, there's one other trick of the trade that you can do with this cutting edge, and that is to hook a burr. That's what master craftsmen do with their old chisels. These chisels are my old ground down chisels that are too short for anything, and I hook a burr on them. I'll show you how to hook a burr, and that is the trick of the trade that's going to save you hours in sanding. Let's go over to the vise. I like to clamp my old chisels into the vise. This is called a burnisher. It has a much harder steel than the steel of the chisel. So steel is actually plastic. It's movable. If you hit it hard enough, you know how a circus tent peg is hammered into the ground so many times the top of it starts to look like a mushroom after it's been pounded enough? Well, steel can move if you push on it hard enough. So this is a hard steel burnisher, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to rub it over the cutting edge. Actually, the bevel is this way and the burnisher is this way. So what I'm doing is I'm actually bending a little burr over the back side. This is called hooking a burr. As you go over you want to go all the way to the edge, so usually it makes a sound like that when you're doing it in the shop. You can tell when somebody's doing it. Now, what I've done is I've hooked a little burr. You can't see it, but you can feel it. And that little burr is great for scraping wood. It's great for scraping out tool marks or scratches. You see, if I drag this over the surface of the wood, it actually makes shavings. You've sort of created, the hook burr is actually a microscopic hand plane. So instead of sanding out tool marks or saw marks or scratches, you scrape them out. When you had to make your own sandpaper, this is all they used. They didn't use a lot of sandpaper before there was electricity. They used scrapes and shaves and very little sanding. And so this trick actually comes from a scraper blade. These have hooked burrs on them. You put them in something that has two handles, and you pull the two handles across the top of a table that has saw marks in it, and it scrapes out, it just scrapes out those saw marks. So hooking a burr is very important. It's a great trick. I was in woodworking for 5 or 6 years before anybody ever told me about hooking a burr. It's one of those epiphanies. It's why didn't anybody ever tell me that to start with? Well, I'm telling you now, this is a way to save 50% of all your sanding. You hook a burr on a scraper blade and you scrape out the scratches. You scrape out the saw marks. You don't sand them out. Now, there are different ways to sharpen different tools. If you sharpen a pair of scissors, let's say, then you have to understand that, but you never do that. You're always doing this. You always want to put a little kind of microscopic serrated edge in scissors that are going to cut hair. There's lots of different tricks for sharpening different things, but this is the main thing you need. This is the quickest, easiest lesson you're going to get in this woodworking course, but it's the most important, because if your tools aren't sharp, they're just not going to work. So this is all it takes to sharpen everything razor sharp. If you need more instruction in sharpening, and you probably all do, stop by my website. I have a tape on sharpening that's an hour and a half long. It covers all this and covers much more. This is all you really need to know, and I can give you this away free, but the tape is 90 minutes long, and it covers everything you need to know about sharpening. And you can go from here, or you can stop by woodguy.com and buy the tape. Until next time, stay sharp, be sharp, look sharp.